This lesson explores how the French and Indian War had an impact on the events leading up to the American Revolution. The French and Indian War, also known as the 7 Years' War, erupted as a result of arguments over imperialism, the leading policy encouraging countries across Europe to expand their influence and conquer new lands. In the New World, both the English and French were competing for trading opportunities and the land located in North America. As a result, there was much land that was argued over. Both the French and the English knew that their expansion opportunities in the New World were essential for this reigning policy of imperialism to be successful. That's why both countries were so committed to retaining their land and trading rights in these areas, and this led to many disputes and ultimately the French and Indian War. This is important because it had devastating and lasting impacts in the New World, most especially for Native American tribes. The war can be considered an awakening experience for the British, who realized that they had been neglecting their new colonies. This led to the stricter and more forceful policies that ultimately inspired the American Revolution. The British also acted out strongly against Native American tribes and nations who had sided with the French during the French and Indian War. Many Native American tribes lost their access to supplies through trading and were forced to comply with the rules of this new country governed by England. Many Native American tribes also fought on the side of the British, with the expectation that in return for their cooperation, they would be able to stop the British from encroaching on their land. What these tribes discovered after the French and Indian War was that many new English settlers began moving onto their land anyways, further increasing the tension between Native Americans and settlers. Before the French and Indian War, the British paid very little attention to the American colonists, which was a policy known as salutary neglect. The British were primarily concerned about the colonists' ability to export raw materials to Britain and the colonists being able to purchase finished goods from Britain. Since the British had to expend so many resources to protect the American colonies during the French and Indian War, however, the British national debt had grown to over £100 million at the end of this conflict. As a result, the British were anxious to increase their earning potential, and this led to the importance of the Navigation Act. As soon as the war was finished, the British Prime Minister at the time, George Grenville, wanted the Royal Navy to reinforce the Navigation Acts. This is a series of rules that require the colonists to limit their trading partners to only provide key goods like tobacco to Great Britain. In addition, products that were coming to the colonies from Europe were taxed in Great Britain. Prior to the French and Indian War, this law had never been seriously enforced as a result of the neglect. But now the British were eager to restock the treasury reserves that had gone dry during the French and Indian War. So the government also passed the Sugar Act in 1764, and this put a tax on any sugar coming in from the West Indies. This was a primary trading port relationship for those in the New World. They needed the sugar coming in from the West Indies, so this higher tax made it much more expensive to obtain. In the past, taxes had been used to support British officials in the New World, but this time the taxes were not being used to provide reinforcement and protection for the colonists, and were instead simply being used to restock the now drained treasury in Great Britain. Remember, it was emptied from having to defend the colonies in the French and Indian War. After this, British Parliament passed the Currency Act, which made paper currencies that were being circulated in the colonies illegal. They couldn't be used anymore. The following year, the Quartering Act was passed, making it mandatory for some colony residents to house and feed British soldiers. So the British rule in the colonies went from salutary neglect to increasing and increasing expenses and requirements on behalf of the colonists. They didn't really see that the protection was coming back to them for the taxes that they were paying. And then the act that sparked the most vigorous response from the colonists was known as the 1765 Stamp Act. Colonists were increasingly frustrated that these taxes did not seem to be covering costs in the local area, and they did not respond positively to demands to house military troops in their own homes. These growing frustrations served as the foundation for arguments about taxation without representation, a key foundational belief for those supporting the American Revolution.